Welcome to Brain Power with Dr. Echo, where each week we discuss how your family can boost brain health by addressing mind, body, emotional, and environmental health. And now, here's the episode. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Brain Power with Dr. Echo. I have, as I like to say, another amazing guest, and it's true. So, without further ado, I want to welcome Miss Bibi Pirayesh to our show today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Yay. So, please tell the listeners more about you and kindly introduce yourself.
Sure. So I primarily work as an educational therapist. That's something that I feel like a lot of people are maybe not familiar with. There's like enclaves on the West Coast and on the East Coast where I think people know about educational therapy, but it's not a field that a lot of people are aware of, but I think it's a really, really important field because it can be so incredibly valuable for children who have different types of learning disabilities. And that's primarily what an educational therapist does. An educational therapist is someone who really understands the learning process, understands it from a developmental level, understands it from kind of my background is in neuroscience. So kind of from that level, and then also understands, what the expectations and the standards and the requirements are, and then is also an expert in learning differences and learning disabilities. So, it's a field that I came into almost by accident. I came from an academic background. I always thought I was gonna, be like a psychologist or something. But I took a job, in that in between time between after graduate school where you're kind of like, okay, now what? I'm not really ready to go back to school again. And I took a job just to sort of pay my rents. And I had never up until that point really worked with, one on one with kids. I was in research and I just immediately fell in love with it. And it was sort of this place where I could finally see research being put into real practice. And I love that. And I was very surprised that I enjoyed working with children so much.
Yes, please.
But yes, yes. But I don't know, I kind of just really got into it, and then I, did a lot more training, etcetera. And I live in Los Angeles, so that's where my practice is. That's where I've been for about 15 years. And primarily my job is to help. I mean, I don't do testing and diagnosis, but it's to kind of a lot of families who come to me have no idea. They just sort of are like, "Oh, it's school is not working. Something is not working."
Right.
And it's my job to then help guide them to where they need to go if they need to get diagnosed, testing, whatever that is. And then some families come to me already with a full neuropsych or full, diagnosis, and then we just kind of dive into, okay, well, what do we need to do now to support the students? So that's, I would say that's kind of like maybe 60% of the work that I do. And then the other 40% is me really advocating for students, sometimes within their own families, but oftentimes in their school system, and really trying to help the systems understand that they need to shift. It's not just about us forcing the child to assimilate into this neurotypical system, but we need to change and have more space for differences. And so I think my new goal now in my work is to shift that balance. It's sort of like 60-40 now. And more I'm seeing that, kids oftentimes become most disabled by the systems that they're having to navigate. So a lot of my remediation work now is around helping parents and teachers and administrators and decision makers really understand that they need to go through a remediation process. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's sort of what I do.
Wow. Okay. So where do we start? Let's see. What you do is so critical because I see parents and they often like, I don't know what next to do. So,
Yeah.
what would you say to a parent that shows up in your office and says, my child is having trouble in school and I can't seem to get help for them? what would you say to that parent?
Well, so the way that I work in a kind of very engaged and involved way. And one of the jobs I think of the educational therapist is to do a great deal of case management. Is to help parents kind of identify all the different people that need to be part of that support system, and then to go out there and really advocate for it. So, for example, after our meeting today, I have an IEP for a student where the parents came to me, exactly with that question. Like, these are, we've done the testing, these are the diagnoses that we've gotten. They have all this information, but it's just not working. What do we do? So my job then, I mean, it always begins with the child. I mean, my first step is always to get to know the child um, without even reading reports or diagnoses. And then I read up on all of that. So the first step that I take is to really try to get a comprehensive, clear picture of what exactly is going on and then where the kind of pain points are. So it might be, for example, that I say, you know, what your child really needs right now is actually to focus on speech and language or something. And we need to find the right placement and the right fit for that. And then I do a lot of hand holding because I think a lot of times what happens for parents is that even when they know what it is that they're supposed to do, because all of this can be so emotionally charged, they sort of become paralyzed by it. It's very, very, there's a huge something that we don't talk about enough is that there can be a huge grieving process with all of this for parents as they kind of come to terms. And oftentimes, learning disabilities have a genetic component, and then it sort of makes them go back and look at their own childhood and their own learning and their own potential, struggles that they've had. So there's like a lot of therapy that also needs to happen in the midst of all this that I think oftentimes gets missed, but is critical. Because you would not believe how often parents know what they need to do, but they just can't quite do it, and they need, support in doing that. And then, of course, there are times where just like where they're like, "This is so overwhelming," because the way that the systems are set up, and I'm of the belief that they're set up this way on, by design, but everything is so disconnected. The all of the responsibility is put on the parents. They are responsible for figuring out all the different pieces and for putting it all together. So if if it is possible, if it's financially, feasible for them, when a parent comes and says, "I have no idea what to do," my recommendation would be to hire an educational therapist, if they can find a good one, so that they can help navigate all the case management stuff while also ensuring that the student is getting what they need in the meanwhile to whatever extent possible academically and in terms of remediation. It's really difficult for a parent to have to do all that while they're also parenting, while they also, full-time job, while they probably have other children. And, we do this unfortunately, I think, because I mean, I've come to learn sort of in the West LA area that the systems are set up in a way that only those parents who have the resources are really able to support their children, which is, a huge social justice issue and a big
Yes.
other kind of passion of mine, but I won't get into that now. So that would be my recommendation. If they can hire one and have someone kind of take some of that weight off of their plate so that they can go back to playing the role as a parent. Because I think one of the things that happens in these cases is the parent is like, okay, I have to be the teacher, I have to be the tutor, I have to be and then that really impedes on the parent child relationship. And then that, just creates chaos all across. So if they have that available to them, I would say do that, bring someone in who can really, really support you. And if that's not available, I would say try to find there are places where you can get like advocates, or there are centers where you can get people who can be your advocate. That would be my number one recommendation, is get someone on your side, whether it's someone that you're paying or maybe someone that, through whatever other way you can come across. And this doesn't necessarily mean, people think of advocates as like, oh, if I'm in a fight with the school system,
Right.
that's when I get an advocate. But it's not. It's when, the whole thing, even if the school system is like is playing ball and wants, just managing the entire thing is so overwhelming that it's
Right.
really good to have someone who understands the landscape. So you're not just kind of like, walking in the dark.
Yeah,
Um,
right. Because that's so critical. You said that because there are laws the educational advocate will know about that you don't even know about. And there are things, I mean, as well, no matter how good the school is, there may be things that they are missing out on, right? That somebody else can catch to help your child reach their potential best. And I love that you pointed that
Absolutely.
out. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, the other thing that I would say, in addition to getting support, is I would say kind of mentally prepare yourself for it to be hard and confusing until everything clicks into place. I think
Right.
a lot of times parents just don't expect, they're just like, I don't know, like it's schooling, why is this so difficult? It really truly is like when you are trying to figure out, like, let's say, a new health or medical diagnosis, it creates an immense amount of pressure. And I think it's even harder than if you are getting a diagnosis yourself because it's your child.
Right.
So I would say just mentally, I think one of the things that I constantly hear myself doing for my clients is just normalizing the difficulty, normalizing the chaos, because that's a big part of the shock is like, oh, am I just, I just don't know what I'm doing, or am I a terrible parent, or why can't I figure this out? No, it really, really is difficult to navigate. So, and everyone else who's going through it is having the same exact experience. You just don't know because you don't have the point of view, for example, that I do, where I see everyone struggling at the same time.
Right.
Um, so yeah, sort of be mentally prepared for that, I think is a big, big help too.
I like that, being mentally prepared, because I think that will take the edge of things. And it's a process.
Right.
Also, like there's no quick fix, unfortunately. And it's a process, and to go at it with the mindset of I'm going into this as I want to like create a team, a partnership between my kid's teacher, kid's principal, even if it may not be that, but it kind of helps if you think about it that way. Because remember, your child is still sitting in that environment with them. So
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. It's interesting because, again, because of the way that the laws are set up, they are set up to kind of put families and parents at odds with the school, because the school has to pay, they don't necessarily want to pay, or they have to provide services. So it's set up as an adversarial relationship, but it actually has to be exactly the opposite of that. Everyone has to be on the same team in order for it to work. Otherwise, it's not going to work.
right,
And how do you, again, like, how do you navigate that? And this is another reason why having someone as like a buffer in between, because I can go to the school and have conversations with them and then, filter that in a way to the parent that's not going to make them fit the school and vice versa. So having a mediator in that process, again, is why I think getting support is so important.
right. And parents listening will say, okay, so where can I find the advocate? Are there places that have like databases? Where can we point parents to who are like, okay, I need that. So now what?
Yeah. So in order to find an educational therapist in your area, you can go to the AET website. It's www.aetonline.org. And I believe that you can use your zip code. Now, with that said, an ed therapist is like anything. It's like a doctor or a lawyer, just because someone has the credentials doesn't mean that they're really good at their job.
Right.
So you do have to still, do some digging and research and find someone that you feel is a good fit. So if you are going that route, and then even if you call them, I mean, I have people call me all the time who are not necessarily going to be able to hire me for my services, but just because of I don't know. I mean, this is just kind of the way that I see myself as responsible as supporting anyone who calls me in any way
Right,
that I can.
right,
So I am still like in my local area, I have a great deal of knowledge. And so if someone calls me, even if I'm not the right fit, I'm still going to try to direct them in the right direction. So I would recommend that even if you are like, well, this is not something that I can afford to do because it's not unfortunately covered by insurance, I would still call and just try to get, see if you can get some information and resources. As far as advocacy, I do know, I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so there are a lot of centers and organizations that provide, these kinds of services for free. There are a few, I will say the Jonathan Foundation is a group that I think, kind of matches people with ed therapists, et cetera, is, at no cost. I don't exactly know what their, how you qualify for that.
right,
Unfortunately, your school is not going to be the best resource. I would say one other really, really important resource is other parents who sort of been through it. So tap into that, create that community and, try to get information. But I can't sort of like, there isn't like a national organization that I can say, like, you have to just kind of check to see what's available in
right.
your area.
I'm glad you pointed out other parents because it's so important. Like you have that community support, and that's why it's important to meet the parent of the children in in your kids' class and form some friendships because it definitely does help.
I'll just add one quick note to that. While I think it's incredibly important to be in that community with others who are in a similar position, I do think it's also really important for parents to remember that no two children
At the
with
same,
learning disabilities are the same. So just because something worked for somebody else, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work for you.
right?
So also be prepared for that.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that. It's absolutely true. You see one child, you've seen one child. So yes,
Exactly.
it goes right back to finding someone who can walk this road as a buffer between you and the
Mhm.
school and help you. Those points are really important. So in the case of a parent who has a diagnosis, has found the educational therapist, and is trying to work through things. You also mentioned creating the environment for learning at home. What are things that parents can do at home to help foster a good learning experience for their kids?
So, first of all, it really depends on what the disability is. So, for example, if we're talking about a student with ADHD, they're going to require very different kind of environments than, a student with a different kind of learning disability. To me, always the most important thing is honoring that parent-child bond and relationship. I think that's number 1, and unfortunately, that's one of the things that immediately goes out the window because the parent finds themselves getting pulled into playing the teacher. And so again, this is another reason why I think having a professional in the mix is important.
Right.
With
Right.
that said, you also have to recognize that you're not going to be, like an hour or 2 hours a week with someone is not gonna you have to bring all this stuff into the everyday practice. I'll tell you what I do sort of in terms of because I do home visits with every
Okay.
client. I think
Okay.
it's incredibly important to sort of see what is going on in the home, what the space is like. Oftentimes, my recommendations are around decluttering and around creating kind of like a safe and attractive, quiet, decluttered space that is kind of like your designated workspace. For
Right.
some students, it works if it's kind of like away. For other students, it has to be, they really need that a constant touch point with somebody else. So
Right.
sometimes you do create that in your living room. But that sort of in terms of the actual space, I would say is one of the most important things. Other thing that I always look at with parents is their calendar. Like, how does the week look? I think most of us are too overscheduled and kids don't have enough time to do nothing. Doing nothing is incredibly important.
Yes,
It's like
it
when
is.
your brain actually processes what it's learning in the time that it's doing the, thing.
Right.
So, I really work with parents to create empty time, for their kids. And then, come up with like appropriate things that they can be doing in that empty time. Sometimes parents are like, they're just like staring at the wall. And I'm like, that's really important. That's
Yeah.
actually really, really good if they're staring at the wall and not always staring at their phone.
Right.
Um, so yeah. So, we really trying to get a clear picture of time and space is a big one. And then also kind of that emotional component. What is going on, in the family dynamics? What does it feel like? How does this, there is, obviously, as there's very little learning that can take place if a child is feeling anxious or if a child is feeling, overwhelmed or, shamed or whatever it is. So figuring out to some extent a little bit, ways in which the family can make adjustments in order to help the child feel more emotionally ready. And sometimes that does include like hiring an actual therapist. Other times it's something as simple as no, no, it's okay if they don't make their bed in the morning. Just, let that goal go. Like just let it be what it is. So, again, it depends on the family, but I would say yes, time, their space, and then the feelings.
And the bond between parent and child. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book I wrote about children's love letters, how your child spells love, because it's more than just time. You'll be amazed at the little things that count. And so I always encourage parents as much as possible. Like you just said, we're overscheduled. I'm gonna go look
Mhm.
at mine too. Like, because I hear myself and the kids are home now from school and they're like, Mommy, play with us, play a card game. I'm like, I have a meeting, I have a meeting. Like, oh my God. So I'm gonna go work on myself too. And then you can look at your own calendar because none of us have arrived. So
Right,
so
right.
yeah, so thank you so much for sharing those. And I have one question I wanted to ask you as you continue to serve parents. This podcast is about brain power. So how do you as a CEO, how do you make decisions?
We were just talking about time. I think for me, that's the greatest luxury. I think that is kind of like richness to me is having my time to myself to do what I enjoy and what I love or to do nothing at all. So I really do make my business decisions based on I sort of like picture my week or picture my semester or picture my year, whatever it is. And I think about what would be the most like luxurious way that this could feel to me. And then I try to make decisions accordingly in terms of the number of clients I take on, in terms of the number of, classes that I teach that I take on, but also in terms of the support that, all the things that I'm saying, parents need to do. I think all of us as professionals also need to do. So
Right.
hiring good people that I can delegate things to so that that frees up my time, I think is really the driving force behind all my decision making. So yeah, I try. I really do try to practice what I preach because that for me that is what helps my like for me self-care,
Mhm.
mental health care is really that is kind of creating time in my day and in my schedule and in my life that's mine. So yeah.
That's wonderful. I love the fact that you use the word luxurious. What feels luxurious to me? Well, if we all thought about things like life like that, what feels
Yeah.
luxurious to me?
Yeah, we all deserve that. We
Yeah.
deserve to have a life of luxury, and a life of luxury
Yes.
does not mean, like fancy cars and
No, it
jewelry.
doesn't.
To me, it means, yeah, what feels good. What feels good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the awareness of self that you have to say, yes, this is what feels luxurious to me, or it's not that, or it's this. Because that's a whole nother
Exactly.
level, right? Because a lot of us go through life not even knowing what that means. Or even as accepting the fact that we can have it for ourselves, right? It's those people over there. And that's not true. And I like what you just said about it's not fancy cars. It's not. What is it that makes me come alive? Because then you give the people that you serve the very best of you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep. And you have to make choices. I mean, this is the other thing with businesses, you have to make choices. So, if I decide to say no to clients because I really want to keep the number of people that I take on small because then I can serve them so much better. I mean, that's a choice that I'm making. Obviously, it means I'm giving up maybe money or I'm giving up I have to hopefully I'm always referring them to someone else so that they're still getting supported, but
Right.
you have to be willing to make choices in order to give yourself that, and you have to be willing to say no.
It's a complete sentence. Always. Oh goodness. Thank you so much for sharing that. That was really wonderful. So can you tell parents where and parents where they can find you, please?
Sure. So my educational therapy website is, where all of my information and background and, contact info is it's kind of a long website name. It's www.oneofonekids.org. And then I actually have sort of a new project that I'm launching around training therapists and training professionals who really want to make radical love the center of their therapy and work. And that's kind of my other personal website, which is drbibipirayesh.com. The two websites are connected. So if you go to one, you can connect to the other. So, depending on where your listeners are, whether they're therapists or parents, they might want to go to one versus the other.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, gee, I love that. That's a whole nother podcast.
That's a whole other podcast.
So you're gonna have to come back. Thank you in
Yeah,
advance.
I'd love to.
Yeah, so we can support you. Yes, that would be
Yay.
amazing. Don't we all need radical love?
Mm. Yeah.
Hmm.
Speaking of luxury,
I know. Speaking of luxury, well, this has been so wonderful talking with you. I hope you parents and whoever's listening, fellow CEOs, that you learned something from this and that you go out and take some action on finding the amazing ways that you can support your children and support yourself, first of all, and then support
Mhm,
your
mhm.
children. And
Yes.
so until next time, we'll see you next time. And I hope you please share this with someone in your world that needs to hear this. Have an amazing day, everyone.